Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here and for accepting my research. What I'm going to talk to you about is a result of this research that has been conducted inside the PhD school of the University of Venice, and in particular has been discussed last year. I'm not going to talk to you mostly about the result of what the system that has come out from the research is, but I'm going to focus more on the process, on some insights that I have reached during the research. First of all, it is needed to say that I'm talking about stroke. Stroke that is one of the diseases that is the first cause of disability in the world and the third cause of death. In particular, the consequences of stroke can vary depending on which area of the brain is affected. As we have also heard in the previous lecture, there can be different kind of impairments, and stroke can have a cognitive impairment or can have also a sensory motor impairment. I focus in the second one in the field of the sensory motor rehabilitation, and in particular with bedridden patients. And the nice news is, well, it's not a news, but the nice thing is that the recovery can be total thanks to the support of rehabilitative devices and therapies. In particular, rehabilitation induces a recovery that is faster than the one that the patient can reach spontaneously, but this implies the involvement of the patient, the dedication of the exercise. It has to be a continuous activity. It cannot be just one in a spare of time. And the external support, the patient is unable to move some parts of his body or most part of the body, total body, so it cannot do the therapy on his own. And last but not least, the use of appropriate devices. Not all the devices fit all the problems. Sometimes some paralysis and some other problems can give some issues for the use of specific instrument. So the core of this part of the rehabilitation is the patient and his or her needs. But the question is, who's the patient and what can we as designers do for them? The design contribution can be on different points. For sure, it starts from the user-centered approach, so starting to understand who's the patient, who the needs, what the needs are, and then continuing with the interdisciplinarity. So understanding how we can, thanks to our backgrounds, match different parts of culture and knowledge, such as the psychology, such as the part of interaction, such as the electronic part, or even the interaction with the engineering and the more mechanical part of the devices, and all the different parts that, gets into the medical design device product. So then we can also foster the involvement of the patient to the therapy thanks to gamification dynamics, so trying to make it more usable following the definition of the international legacies in terms of efficacy, of efficiency, and satisfaction. So how can we make more affordable, even in economic terms, for the structures to have innovative devices that can really be a huge cost for the structures in terms of acquisition, of training of the person that are going to use them with the patient, or training of the patients as well, and maintenance, because we have to consider all the different interactions that are going to be with the specific device, not just the rehabilitative part. The user is not just the patient. The user is also the therapist and the other person that are going to clean and to move and to take care of that device. So how did I conduct my research? I started with a preliminary research, not definitely on products, but started with a literature research. I tried to clarify what were the main points I wanted to address. And with a second literature study, trying to understand how was the design of rehabilitative device treated by the different disciplines that are designing that at the moment. So from engineering and from the neurologic point of view, from the medical field, so how the physicians feel in comparison, or how do they feel when using, and which is the difference and what are their needs as well. So then I had an on-field observation that I collected with a patient journey that helped me to define which of the points that I found before were interesting for a further development. The second part was the design process in his own classic terms. So starting from the brief that I defined, the development of a concept, the sketches and the check of the sketches with what was the clinical equipment, and all the mock-up and testing. And then I tried to understand and to develop what can be a possible future pattern from engineering and production. So the engineering, the prototyping, the clinical testing. And what I did reach in the end was not a final product, but a starting point for a further research. What I'm going to focus on in particular till the end of this presentation is the patient journey and the important meaning that it has had for my research. I use that as a tool, learning from mock online massive course in designing healthcare from TU Delft. And first of all, it was important to understand who are the actors. The actors are not just the patient. The actors are also, as I tell you before, all the physicians and all the person interacting with them during the process, and even the objects they are in contact with. So even the robotic device or the virtual reality tool, they can be considered actors. A second step was through the involvement. So how were they connected, and what was the impact that one had on the other? And so I tried to make a really handmade map that was really useful to understand what were the connections, who was relevant for what. And as you can also see from this mess, it's really a lot of connection that interacts in different ways. So it's not possible to take one out of the context. Last but not least was the phases, because a stroke is starting one moment and it has a lot of different phases of rehabilitation, starting from the first primary assistance to the hospitalization to all the different stages of the rehabilitation and to the discharge from the hospital if it's possible. So working in an on-field experience, I did an observation in a real stroke unit in the hospital in Trieste in Italy. And it was important for me to understand and to discuss on the real problems that they found inside the stroke unit. And what was the result of this part? It was for sure the identification of different areas of intervention. Possible design intervention was on the digitalization of patient data, so on creating more intuitive and more effective protocols or programs to be shared between all the different therapists and all the personnel so that they can use the same material at the same time updated with the last data of the patient. One more was the support for nurses in patient mobilization during acute phase. So when the patient is not able to move on the bed, someone has to be there and to control that the position is stable and is right position, and this has to be done really a lot of time during the day. So every movement can drive to a wrong position for the recovery, and that's, you can imagine, has really bad consequences. So then another possible intervention was the facilitators for communication. So when the people have some cognitive impairments and they are not able to understand the protocols or to communicate them, to try to make something that makes more simple the language for which we are using or we are trying to speak, even for just a simple authorization for going on with our medical practice. And last but not least, the rehabilitation, the design of a system for lower limb rehabilitation to be used on bedridden patients. What does exist at the moment still implies the patient to be in a standing or sitting position, and this is not always possible for all the people after stroke, and not even in the first phases. That takes the most important time for re-enable the neural plasticity and the brain to rewire itself and regain the movement. So why don't work on bedridden patient, but moreover, why don't work with bedridden patient? Because it's something that has to be done together. So all this part of research also allowed me to find the needs and the constraints for working with public healthcare structure. If we are talking of a system to be used with bedridden patient, of course there is the bed. The bed that is the one that is already existing in a public structure. So we don't have to design a new bed that another structure has to build, but something that can fit what is already existing if we want to be effective in a short time with the low costs. So to go quickly on conclusions, the on-field observation was really important to understand the analysis of the state of art, to circumscribe the design interventions, so to be really, really punctual on that, and to set fixed elements that was the starting point for creative results, and for focusing on the user-centered design approach. Why still keeping on the user-centered design approach? It might sound obvious, but consider medical project in all its complexity, and with an user-centered approach is the core of design research, and the keystone for designing more efficient, effective, and satisfactory healing experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca.